We've got 6 wines to look at this evening, and hopefully, like I say, you have them and you're ready to go with them. If you do have the sample pack, or if you have all of the wines as the bottles, it would be a good idea if you're able to. I did mention in the pre-event email, but it would be a good idea if you're able to pour a glass of wines 4, 5 and 6 now, so it has a little bit of time to open up and have a bit of air to it before we get to those ones. So lovely, we've got just around 100 of us on the webinar this evening, so let's get going with Malbec. So you're probably thinking that Malbec is quite synonymous to Argentina, or perhaps that's what it's more thought of as now in the kind of modern perception of a Malbec, but it actually originated in the southwest of France, where it was known as Côte or Auxerrois, including in Bordeaux, where it was one of the permitted varieties. It's much less common in Bordeaux now. Unfortunately, they had some very severe frosts in 1956, which decimated the Malbec plantings, and instead of planting them again, they decided to plant some varieties such as Merlot, which are a little bit more resistant to the frosts. Malbec is an early budding variety, so it really is one that does see some damage in those early stages, so the spring frosts are particularly bad for it. Mainly in the southwest of France now, it's likely to be found, or it's primarily found in Cahors and also in terrain in the Loire Valley. However, its modern home is now in Argentina, with around 70% of the world's plantings in Argentina, with the more higher quality, perhaps, the more refined examples in Mendoza. And although it took to the growing environment very well, it took until around the 1990s for the Argentine wine industry to actually fully appreciate and come to understand what a lot of the foreign wine lovers were saying about how well Malbec did in Argentina. For a while, they had their indigenous variety of Bernarda overtaking in the most planted varieties in the region. They focused a lot more on Cabernet Sauvignon and Bernarda, but finally around in the 90s, they recognised it for its star quality, and it's now the region we most likely know as the place for Malbec. There are some newer regions that are experimenting and doing pretty well with Malbec as a single varietal and in blends. We recently had a South African Malbec, which was from Withington Wines, based in Darling. That was very popular. We had the 2019 vintage. It went very quickly. I had hoped to use it in the webinar this evening, but it proved too popular. So I'm hoping it will come back again with us in the 2020 vintage. And if you've not already done so, I would highly recommend keeping an eye out to try that one. New Zealand is also seeing a lot of really good Malbec used in blends, primarily Bordeaux blends, and it's really playing a part in that region as well. Like I say, it is an early budding variety, so it does make it quite susceptible to spring frosts. And it's got a very thick skin, which means it gives really good colour and those high tannins, which you come to expect from Malbec. I think we've got an image of some Malbec grapes that we can show you, just to show how deep and dark those skins are. They've got that real blue hue to them. It produces wines that are quite high in alcohol, with a high tannic structure. They've got moderate acidity, and the tannic structure does mean that they are very good for any sort of oak aging, although obviously there are some Malbecs that in the past perhaps will have had a bit too much oak on them, and they're getting a little bit more refined in their use of oak from producers nowadays. In the cooler climates, it produces wine that's a bit more floral. It's got more of a perfumed character to it. And then in the warmer climates, you get that riper, darker, more sort of concentrated fruit, although you can get that quality as well, depending on the sort of vineyard management techniques that certain producers will use. So if we've got some wines to go with, I think everyone has poured if they're wanting to pour and taste along. The first wine that we are starting with this evening is the Terrain Malbec from Domaine Mendel 2019. Now, fortunately, I can't show you the bottle, but I have got it in my glass here. But I think we've got a bottle shot that we can pop up if you have the bottle to hand, or if you are wanting one to think of for your future wine shopping lists. Lovely, there we go. So it's a 13%, this one. So it's not too high in the grand scheme of Malbec, but as you can see, or hopefully you'll be able to see, I'll maybe try and put some white behind it. It's got that really lovely, dark, inky quality that you get from Malbecs from this area. If you tilt the glass slightly, you should be able to see around the rim, you've got that really nice sort of magenta-y purple brightness to it as well. So this is the Terrain Malbec, and I do have to apologise in advance because I feel that you're going to see my teeth progressively get darker and darker as we go this evening when we taste it. But yes, lovely. So we've got a map up here. So the Terrain region is that sort of orange region in the middle. If you've got one of the packs, you should have a map with you so you can look at it a little bit closer. Of course, if anyone would like these maps sent round by email, we can do that for you tomorrow as well. So it's in that sort of middle region along the Loire Valley. And taking a bit of a sniff, a bit of a swirl, it's got a real dark sort of blackberry and blueberry concentrated fruit on the nose. There's a bit of a violet perfume. Not too Parma violet, it's more of a deeper sort of violet bouquet, like a fresh cut violet. And then I'll do a little taste. I'll try and do that as discreetly as possible as we go this evening. But it's really ripe and really lovely concentrated dark fruit. It's almost like the cordial intensity of a fruit without the real sort of cloying sweetness that you'd get from a cordial. Real lovely blueberry and blackberry on there, a little bit of cassis. There's a bit of perceived sweetness because it's so ripe. It doesn't have too much of a complexity to it. It's very much all the sort of primary fruit characteristics. This is one that actually I think you could have a little bit chilled, particularly on an evening like this. I mean, for me in Hertfordshire, it's quite muggy this evening. So if you were chilling this, it would be really nice and quite refreshing. Yeah, Philip says it's not unpleasant, but there's not much to it. That's true. It's not got as much complexity as some of the other wines that we'll be tasting this evening. But I think it's got that real sort of fruit-forward ripeness to it. And we describe it as having a hint of bosky, darker perfume. Now, I do have to say I had to Google what bosky meant, but it turns out that means sort of like a wooded undergrowth. So there is a slight hint of that I'm getting, but it's definitely more of the primary, the fruit-forward qualities to start with. This is from Domaine Mendel, which is based in the hamlet of Loire, which is just outside Marolles-sur-Cher. I do apologise for my French accent, which is on the south of the Loire, and the winery and the vineyards are hand-tended vineyards from Jean-Christophe Mendel. It's quite a modest operation, but they are very high on attention to detail and careful vineyard management, which I think does come across in the concentration of the fruit, the purity of the fruit. There may not be too much going on in terms of complexity and changes as you're having it in your glass, or even, there's not a huge finish, but you can definitely pick out those sort of blueberry, cassis, blackberry qualities through the fruit. So let me know what you're thinking if you're trying that wine. I'll give you a moment if anything comes through, so while I get the second glass. I have pre-poured all of these, so it's nice and convenient to use. The second one that we'll be looking at this evening is the Cahors. This is quite a difference to the first wine. And I would say if you're able to, and you've got all six, do keep a little bit in your glass. It might be nice to go back and do some comparisons between them. So the next one, wine number 2, is the Cahors Petit Clos from Clos Tricodina, which is a 2017 vintage and 14%, so a little higher in the alcohol. There we go, we've got a lovely picture of Cahors there for you. So it's around the River Lot, along the River Lot it goes there. So you've got that lovely cooling influence from the river. And elevation is really important for Malbec. So the higher up sort of on the banks you go, the better it is, because you can get a higher acidity. Obviously, it's a moderate acidity variety. So you want a nice amount of acidity to be able to be in a lovely balance with the fruit and the tannic structure and the alcohol. So we've got the Cahors in the green section of the map there. Lovely, Tim's just getting the cursor on it. And if you see very faintly, you should probably see the River Lot just passing through Cahors, sort of horizontally along. So this one, in comparison, yeah, absolutely, Mike, the nose is quite different with number 2. If you still have some of number 1, go back between them if you're able. This one is much a darker fruit, so there's some more black cherry on there for me. A bit of damson, it's definitely not as aromatic. Excuse me. This one definitely has more of a tannic presence, but it's a really nice tannin. It's not astringent. I don't find it particularly harsh. It's quite grippy, but it's got that really nice sort of dusty, chalky quality, almost a little bit like sort of a cocoa powder dryness. So it's not drying and stripping. It's dry as in more like a dusty kind of dryness, really. There's no other way to describe it, but there is a little bit of oak in this wine, which gives some really nice sort of tobacco and vanilla spice qualities to it as well. It's nicely balanced in the alcohol. It is 14%, but I think with the tannic structure, and that's an important thing as well to take into consideration when we talk about balanced wines. When you're tasting a wine, it's how the kind of fruit concentration and the depth of fruit, how well that plays with the structural elements of a wine. So the alcohol, the tannin, the acidity, how well they kind of are balanced together. And this one really, really has that. There is a little bit of Merlot in the blend, which does add a sort of plushness, a bit of a riper red fruit on the palate. But to the stipulations for a Cahors is that it has to have at least 70% Malbec, which this one very much does. Nicholas has popped in the chat, yes, the Cahors would of course referred to as black wines. Absolutely, and this one is very much a darker wine. I can see already there's some darkening of my mouth happening in comparison to the first wine. This one is from Clos Tricodina, which is a leading estate in Cahors, which is in the southwest of France. I don't know if I mentioned that, but it's been owned by the Baldes family since 1830. Jean-Luc Baldes is the current owner, has around 57 hectares of vines. They do produce some white and rosé Cahors as well, but it's the red Cahors that is the sort of preferred style and the star of their vineyards. And their style of production is to produce these wines with a real nice structure and generous flavour, which I'm hoping you will agree with when trying that wine. The text says, Malbec and Merlot, is that really right? Still official Cahors? Yes, it is. So as I say, it has to be at least 70% Malbec to be a Cahors. So it can have a small amount of Merlot in the blend, but it is a blend of the both. Okay, lovely. It is still youthful as well, so there is a bit more on the nose and the glass. Yeah, this is definitely one that will, I mean, we're saying that this will drink till around 2024, and as you likely know, we like to be conservative on our drink dates, so definitely I would even maybe go up to sort of 2026, 2028 with this. It's definitely got the structure to be able to have that support as the wine ages. and you'll get more of that because it's had that nice bit of oak maturation as well. You'll get a nice bit of development, maybe some sort of more leathery flavours, and a bit more from the spice as it ages through. So let's move maybe to Malbec. So the first of our Malbec wines, we've got a trio of wines from Malbec. So we're taking a little journey. We're leaving France, off to Malbec, and we'll come back to France to finish on the last wine. So wine number 3. Yes, sorry, I realised we're going to Argentina. We're not going to Malbec. We are off to Argentina now. So wine number 3 is the Susana Balbo, which is the Cahors single vineyard Mendoza Malbec. It's a 2017 vintage again, and again 14% for this one. Now, I'm hoping you'll see again that there is a complete sort of different profile on the nose with this one. The very first thing that I kind of find with this is there is a real sort of earthy, herbaceous element, which when I first tried this wine and smelt it a few weeks ago and we were choosing what to include, it really reminds me of cress. When you buy a punnet of cress and you've got that greenness from the leaves, but a little bit of the mulchy quality from the, I'm assuming, soil that it's grown in. But then as well as that, you've got some really nice bright red fruits, so some really nice crunchy cherries, some really kind of intense raspberry, yeah, very earthy and peppery, Tony, absolutely. So even a bit of maybe watercress, that kind of quality. There's some nice brambly fruit as well. And there is a floral quality. There is that nice sort of violet petal. No, Mike, strawberries, absolutely. Your sense of smell hasn't gone. This is very much more in the realms of red fruit, the berries and cherries, in comparison to the Cahors and even to the Terrain Malbec that we had to start. I'm hoping with this one, you'll be able to feel the acidity is that bit higher. It's got a nice freshness to it. It should be making your mouth water a little bit. If you, it's not particularly glamorous, but if you kind of hang your mouth open a little, you'll be able to find the saliva gathering in the sides of your cheeks, which is a really nice way of being able to judge the acidity of a wine. Now we've got the map up for you here. So the Cahors vineyard is, the Cahors region, which is where the vineyards for this Malbec are grown, is in the Uco Valley in Mendoza. So if you are looking at the map, there we go, we've got the cursor on it there. So in the Uco Valley, and it's produced by Susana Balbo, who is quite the legend in Argentina. She was the first woman in Argentina to receive a degree in oenology, and she focuses on producing wines with real purity and elegance. The Cahors region is in the Uco Valley, as we've just seen, and the altitude there plays a real important part. So you've got the vineyards planted between 1,100 and around 1,500 metres above sea level, which provides a really good diurnal variation. So that's the change in the day temperatures and the night temperature. And that variation is by about 10 to 15 degrees, which means that you get a really nice, good colour, a really good tannic structure, and the acidity is nice and fresh because you've got that cooler night temperature. So the wine and the grapes don't sort of lose their acidity as they ripen. It does mean you also retain that lovely aromatic quality rather than it going into the realms of sort of cooked fruit or stewed fruit. It's matured in oak for about 11 months. It's in 20% new oak and 80% of second use oak. So the oak is not overpowering. You've not got a real like onslaught of spicy, vanilla-y flavours that overpower the fruit and the floral quality. But it's there to provide a bit of structure, and it also just helps with the longevity of the wine. As we've seen with the Cahors, the oak there will help it sort of develop some lovely tertiary characteristics as well as it ages. Yeah, lovely, some licorice spice going in there with number 3, absolutely. And I agree, yeah, Robin, the solar exposure also does really help on the elevation. So you're getting that lovely sun in the day to help ripen and get that really nice phenolic ripeness, which gives you the lovely flavours and aromas of the wine. And then in the evening, you've got the cooling influence, so it keeps the acidity nice and fresh. Now, as we are at the sort of halfway point with the wines there, Gil, are there any questions that have come in so far for those three that we want to look at now?
Hello. We do, yes. We do have a few questions. There are one or two that are a bit more sort of general questions rather than specific to any of the wines. So perhaps leave those to the end if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there is one with regards to the Cahors that we tasted, the second wine. Just in reference to our text and referencing Malbec and Merlot. And just the question from Paul and Susan Newby is that really right? And are they still official in Cahors? Are they still officially Cahors?
Yes, so as we were saying, so it's with Cahors, it's the stipulations and the regulations are that you do have to have at least 70% of your blend to be Malbec, but the other permissible varieties are Merlot and Tannat. So you could decide to have, say, 20% Tannat, 10% Merlot, and still have your 70%, or you could have a 90% Malbec Cahors with, say, 10% Merlot if you just want to have a little bit of extra sort of. I always find Merlot's quite plush wine, so perhaps depending on the vintage, it just gives the winemakers a little bit of flexibility in what they want to do with their blend. If they've had a particularly hot year and the Malbec is really particularly high in alcohol, if you have a bit of a blend of the Merlot in, which may be a little bit lower, you can sort of balance it out for your vintage, depending what you want to have from your wine.
I think we've also, as we're speaking there, Peter has mentioned on the chat there that is Malbec still known as Cot in Cahors? I think he did mention the various synonyms, but
yes, so it can be still known as Cot. It's more likely to be known as Cot in Touraine in the Loire Valley. It's also known as Auxerrois in Cahors as well, but as it's become so much more synonymous perhaps with Argentina and people just recognize it more as Malbec, it's more likely to be referred to as such, because for international markets and say it just is more recognizable a variety than Cot, which is kind of gone not out of fashion as a term, but perhaps one that's not as recognizable for people that are perhaps less familiar with the varieties.
I think the complication with the Auxerrois synonym is it's also a grape variety in Alsace, a white grape variety, as well as
absolutely. So that does throw in some confusion. That one is very much very minimally referred to as Auxerrois, but there's, like with a lot of grape names, there's a lot of changes over the years, and there's also a lot of repetition for varieties that have the same name but are completely different.
We've also, now that we've opened the floodgates of the questions, Catherine, they're coming in. James is asking again with the Cahors, what, with regards to the character of the wine, what do Merlot and Tannat provide, and within their components rather, what do they give to those wines?
Well, Tannat, if we start with that one, because it's one that's quite self-explanatory, or perhaps self-explanatory by its name, or perhaps self-perceivable. Tannat has very much a strong tannic structure. So if you were using Tannat in your blend, it could be that your Malbec hasn't necessarily done as well that year, and you need a little bit of help with the tannic structure. So you want to stick with your 70% Malbec, and you get some Tannat in there as well to help bulk out the structure, and also with the colour as well. Merlot, in comparison, is a wine that is quite a soft textured, fruit forward, a lot of like red fruit, plums, some sort of baking spices, a little bit of a chocolatey character. So again, that could be the other way if your Malbec has done really well and has got some really sort of hot flavours of the fruit. So obviously the hotter it is, the riper the fruit. It could go into that almost cooked fruit, and you don't want to have too much of that quality. You can blend in some of the Merlot to just soften out the fruit a little bit.
Yes, well, that's all the questions so far in Cahors. So I don't know if you are happy to jump into, are we Argentina?
On to wine number 4, our second Argentinian. Yep. Perfect. So wine number 4 is this one. I appreciate they all look the same as I'm holding up a glass. I do promise that I've got one of each. I'm not just holding up the same one. But this is the Cahors Tomal Vineyard La Consulta Malbec 2015. This one is 13.5%, so it's a little bit lower in alcohol than the previous two. It's much more of a sort of flinty, like iron quality on the nose. And I don't know if this is my perception based on the name, but the domain Cahors means blood of the earth in the local Huarpe Indian language of Mendoza. And I think maybe subliminally knowing that it means blood of the earth, I get a sort of iron filings, or a little bit like if you bite your tongue, and that slight bloody iron metallic tang that you can get from iron. It's really coming through on the nose for me. I also get a lot of black cherry. There's some cassis. There's a real sort of smoky rose and violet perfume there. Almost like you've burnt some petals, or you've been burning them in a bit of a bonfire if you're clearing some garden waste. And then we do a taste of this one. It's much plusher on the palate. The tannins are so well integrated. It's a really smooth, velvety wine. It's very, very elegant, I find. It's it's very generous. We've said the fruit's generous and welcoming, and it really is. It really sort of envelopes your palate. And the tannins are there, but they are so well integrated and so plush that the fruit concentration is just so silky and smooth as it goes down. I know we haven't got to the other two yet, but I would say this is probably my favorite of the night. This one is from, there we go, we've got the Mendoza vineyards there. You can see the Andes in the background, so you see the cooling influence off of the mountains, and then as you're going up the sides of the valley, you really get that elevation that we spoke about before. So this is produced by 55 Malbec, and they are based in the cool La Consulta region in the southern Uco Valley. So if we're able to get there we go, we've got the map again. So where we've got the Uco Valley, they are actually that bit nearer San Carlos, still in the Uco Valley, but a little bit more down in the south there. And 55 Malbec was founded by Alejandro Sedanovic and Jeff Mauschbach in about 2009. They'd both been working together at Catena and decided to go into making their own wines together. The name derives from a 4-hectare vineyard that they bought, which is now named the Tomal Vineyard, which is where the Cahors vines are produced. They purchased it and thought it was planted in 1955. Hence the name 55 Malbec. And they've since discovered that one half of it was, but the other half, where the vines for the Cahors wine are from, was actually planted in 1940. So these vines are very old. I say that very old. They're quite old. Don't want to be too ageist to vines, but they're fairly old as vines go. Now their aim is to make wines that really express the terroir of the vineyard, and this soil profile that they have is quite shallow, light silt with a rocky subsoil. They do have some patches of rocky topsoil and surface stones in the upper southwest of the vineyard. Now you may think, oh, why are we going into soil now? And it's opening up that slight floodgate of whether you can actually taste terroir. We've spoken about it in previous events. It's one of those things that in the wine industry, it's a can you taste it? Does it have an influence? We talk about minerality and flinty characters. Is that coming through from the ground? I can't for definite say. You may find that, you're drinking a wine like this and you're tasting those qualities and it feels that perhaps it might be. Whether it's really the case or not, I don't know, but it's very interesting that they do have this sort of soil and you can almost taste it in the glass. It's but it's a very, very elegant wine. It's it's one that I think is really quite standout. But oh, Gil, were you about to jump in there?
I am, sorry, yes. We've had a couple of questions just come through on, on Mendoza, but on this wine in particular, I'll start with. A question from John, just asking how this wine will change as it matures over the next decade, how we see that going.
Yes, so this one, the structure of it is, the tannic structure is very sort of soft and well integrated and developed, but it is still there. And it's got the alcohol. Of course, it's not crazy high, and it's got the acidity as well. It's got a nice amount of freshness from the acidity. But the fruit concentration is so much, it's so there that it will really develop. I mean, look, we've said to 2031, that's a good amount of time. The fruit is very generous. There is a lot to hold it together. It's not going to be flabby and fall apart. You will get more of a dried fruit as it ages. So that's more of a sort of a dried damson, a bit of a dried cherry, and some leathery elements to it as well, but like a sweet leather, like if you're walking in sort of past a leather market and it's got that sweet sort of not acrid, that's not going to sound particularly pleasant, but it's got that quality to it that is not going to be sort of old and dusty, but very, very nice.
Excellent. I've got another question that perhaps might lead quite nicely onto the next wine.
Mm-hmm.
It's a question from Philip here saying, is there blending of Malbec in Argentinian wines, or is it more often a single varietal?
That's a great, interesting question. There is blending, and obviously this one is just Malbec in this one. And I did notice there was a quick question, the production volume of this wine. It's also very small. They do quite small production runs of the Tomo because it's a single varietal. So if you want to be able to kind of have a larger production, producers more often will blend some other wines into there. And these are wines like, particularly in Argentina, wines like Cabernet Sauvignon and perhaps some Merlot, some other Bordeaux varietals. So we're going to get onto it in the last two wines as we move sort of back to the style of how Malbec was used way back in when it was originally sort of made as a wine in southwest France. So it does come as a blend. Often as well, you've probably had a lot of, or you may be familiar with more of the sort of the bulk Malbecs made in Argentina, and those also will be a blend just to be able to stretch that fruit out and keep up with the demand, because it's a very popular wine, Argentinian Malbec.
We have some of our members I can see jumping onto the next wine already.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Let's go on to wine number 5. Lovely. So yeah, it's absolutely lovely on the nose. I agree, Philip. So this one is the Mendel Unas Mendoza, which is a 2018 vintage. So it is the youngest wine that we have. Oh, no, it's not. It's the second youngest wine that we have this evening. Forgot about the terrain, but it's the youngest Argentinian that we have this evening, and it is the highest in alcohol. This is actually 14.5% alcohol. You've got some really Really lovely, dark, rich fruit on there, some cassis, black cherry. There's some really nice woody herbs, that sort of garrigue quality that you get, the French like to refer to. So it's that really woody, herby, undergrowth sort of quality. I also find that there's a little bit of a sort of a tarry element. I suppose a better way to describe it would maybe be a little bit of a balsamic character. Tar doesn't particularly sound too pleasant when you're talking about a wine. And there's some lovely cedar there as well. Now this one, you would be forgiven for thinking it might be something else. Let's have a taste of it. Yes, very intense there. Really nice concentrated fruit. If you had that one blind and you were familiar with Bordeaux wines, you'd be well forgiven for thinking that is a Bordeaux blend from the left bank. It's got a good amount of some Cabernet Sauvignon and some Petit Verdot in there as well. So it adds the complexity to the wine. The Cabernet Sauvignon also imparts that bit of cedary, herbal, a little bit minty maybe. It's a little bit fresh on the palate there. And it just gives a nice bit of structure, extra structure to the wine. The Petit Verdot adding a greenness to it as well. So it just is very much made in a quite a European style, this one. And it's produced by Mendel, which is a very old bodega, which are situated in Drummond in Mendoza. They were built in 1928, and it was bought by the Silecki family in 2002. And they employed Roberto della Motta to make the wines, very highly respected in the Argentine wine industry. And they are, like I said, they're quite European in style. They're very firm and structured, as opposed to the softer and fruitier Malbecs that you can get from Argentina, like is shown in wine number 4 in the Tejo Tomo. So those two side by side are very different wines. So when you say you like an Argentine Malbec, there is so much diversity within the region as well. They're designed to develop in bottle. So this is very young. It's got a lot going on for it, and it's really got complexity, which you perhaps wouldn't expect from a wine this young, but this is only going to develop. I mean, those fruits are you're going to get that nice sort of almost cigar box, a bit of tobacco going on, some more leather. It does have a little bit of oak used in there. I think if I'm right in saying that, yeah. So that will have some baking spice quality as well. We'll go into those really nice tertiary qualities. And with the Cabernet Sauvignon and the Petit Verdot, you're also going to maybe get a bit of a mushroomy umami that balsamic is going to carry on developing. The vineyard is in Pedriel, which is in Finca de los Andes, and it's situated at about 1,100 meters above sea level. It was planted to Malbec in 1928 with a bit of Cabernet Sauvignon planted in about 20 years ago. The Petit Verdot comes from some of their other vineyards in the region. And the 2018, I think one of the reasons it is has got so much going on for it, although it is still quite young, is that it was a very good vintage. It had some low yields, which meant that the quality of the wine, the grapes were that bit higher in quality, but it's definitely one that's going to develop as we go on. I mean, that one, I'm saying 2032 is our sort of conservative end date, but absolutely another 10 or more years for that one. Yeah, a few people saying it's a little bit challenging. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one as well to decant. So hopefully, if you're able to, you've done that. I've had it sort of decanted in the glass for, it was about quarter to 6 I started. So we've got that ready to go, but absolutely lovely. That's one that will be really great with some high protein food. So if you're having a bit of steak or some cheese, that one would be really lovely. And they all would be great with food, but that one particularly would welcome it. Was there anything, Gil, on that one before we move to our to our final wine of the evening.
So again, there are a few questions that I think once we've tasted the final wine, a few that we can look at. It's sort of more general with Malbec, but one before we move on to Bordeaux for the final wine, just on those last two wines in particular, any sort of food matching suggestions from yourself?
Yeah, so see, I don't think you can mention Argentinian wine without mentioning steak. One of my good friends is Argentinian, and unfortunately his wife is vegan, so it took her going out at the weekend for him to be able to cook himself a good bit of steak. But absolutely steak, although there's a lot of flavor in Argentinian food if you're wanting to pair it specifically with a Malbec, but there's not necessarily a huge amount of spice or heat that you'd get in other cuisines, which works nicely because you don't want to really blow your socks off with the high alcohol, but something that's got a real good protein structure. So we talk about the steak, red meat, strong cheeses, so a good chunk of cheddar. So something that's got a protein in it that gives you that mouthfeel of richness. Obviously, if you're vegetarian, vegan, then you're going to have foods that are high protein, something like tempeh or seitan, but they're not necessarily going to give you the same mouthfeel. It's a cleaner feel. So for that, if you are looking for something meat-free, something like mushrooms, so there's really big like portobello mushrooms, or something with a coating, perhaps if you were barbecuing some aubergine, if you were doing some barbecuing at the weekend or in the past week with the nice weather, some aubergine with perhaps a sort of umami rich kind of miso dressing on there, something that really is meaty in the sense of richness, not necessarily meaty in the sense of it has to be meat. As well, when you're looking back at the Cahors, things like Roquefort, Toulouse sausage, those sort of hearty foods that you'd get from France, the sort of more rustic foods and cuisine, anything that's got a good level of texture, so like a bean stew, like a cassoulet as well, something like that. I could talk about food all evening.
Well, I'm sure there'll be some more questions on food, and we can go back sort of after the sixth wine. But I'm not sure about yourself and members, but I'm quite keen to hear about the final wine in the lineup.
Yes, lovely. So let's go on to wine number 6. So this one, we're going back to France, and we are going to Bordeaux. We are going to the right bank of Bordeaux. So this is in the Saint-Emilion area of Bordeaux. Hopefully we've got the map there for you. Now, I know earlier on I said that the Malbec in Bordeaux was pretty much a goner after the frosts of 1956. But there are some producers that still like to use it. It's a historical variety in the region, and they do like to use it in the blends, and Roc de Cam is one of those. So hopefully you will be able to see, I'm not sure it will help you if I hold the glasses up side by side. Unfortunately, it's a bit dark, but if you've got the Roc de Cam and one of the other ones, particularly if you've got the first wine, if you tilt them together, you should be able to see the real difference in colour. Now, oh no, that's not really very helpful. So the Roc de Cam is much redder. It's more of a rusty red around the rim in comparison to the very first one and some of the others, which have got more of that magenta-y purple character to it. That in part is a lot from the Merlot in the blend. So it's the Roc de Cam Côte de Bourg 2014, and it's a 13.5%. Now on smelling this one, so much more red fruit and really sort of developed and really nice cedar there. There's some big cherries and a little bit of a strawberry, but there is still a nice sort of herbal and floral lift from the Malbec. Some lovely sweet spice as well from the oak. Now, the blend has 5% Malbec in here. the Roc de Cam Côte de Bourg, it has, dependent on vintage, they have between about 5 and 12% any of the vintage, dependent on the vintage. 5 to 12% is going to be Malbec. This one, the 2014, has 5%. So it's a lot of Merlot in the blend. Yeah, I see there's Richard, there is some confusion, or there can be some confusion. It's Merlot dominant, but it does have Malbec in there as a little seasoning to the blend, and it does give that floral, herbal quality. So yes, Philip, so no. So it's not really a Malbec at all, not a Malbec dominant wine at all. But we chose this one, obviously we had this one at the end because it was the one with the least amount of Malbec in it. But it just shows how it can be used in different blends and the characteristics it can lend itself to in a blend. So if you were having a Côte de Bourg that didn't have any Malbec in, you wouldn't necessarily get that floral quality to it either. So Chateau de Roc de Cam is made, the wines are made by the meticulous, eccentric and inspired Francois Mitteville, who acquired Roc de Cam in 1987. The first vintage was in 1989. And the 12-hectare vineyard contains some very old vines, some of them up to about 50 years old. It lies on a rock shelf with deep clay limestone soils overlooking the Gironde. So that's why it's really suited for the Merlot, which is the predominant mix. It's that classic right bank mix of having 75% Merlot. It's got about 20% Cabernet Sauvignon, and this vintage, the 5% Malbec. They do vinify it in concrete tanks before transferring it to barrels, half of them being new oak, and it's matured in barrel for about 18 to 24 months. Now, it is very different to the other wines that we've had, but it just shows that sort of journey and the styles of Malbecs from the different regions. In terms of development, this one, it does have that nice sort of tannic structure as well. The Malbec only enhances that. Obviously, when you're thinking of Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon in Bordeaux, a nice way to think about it is as a donut. If you imagine a jam donut, the Cabernet Sauvignon is your dough, is the structural element, and you've got that nice plush Merlot jam in the middle. So the Malbec just adds to the structure there, and keeps the wine in a tip-top condition to be able to mature well, and it's going to get that lovely tertiary qualities from the oak, a lot of spice going on, and the leathery qualities as well. It is an interesting blend. Lovely. That is all 6 wines that we've gone through this evening. So I think, Gil, have you got some more general questions, or perhaps some questions about the Roc de Cam?
So I do have some general questions there, but just on the Roc de Cam, it may not be a Malbec dominant blend, but it's a delicious wine, and it's amazing how much, as you say, something as small as 5% can actually impact the result and the flavors of that wine. If you try it against a wine that didn't have even 5%, they'd be quite different.
Absolutely, and I do think it's nice as well that it's still being used in Bordeaux. It's where it was one of the original places for it, and it's nice that Roc de Cam is one of the producers that do want to kind of go back to using it and not just sticking with the Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot and the Cabernet Franc that we're perhaps used to. But yeah.
Now I've got a question here. This is from Jonathan Robinson, who has asked a question, not specifically actually about any of the 6 wines tonight, but it is a Malbec. It is related to this. The question is, who makes the Society's exhibition Mendoza Malbec?
The exhibition Mendoza Malbec, I'm fairly sure that is Laura Catena, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yeah, I think
that
so.
Is Laura Catena that makes that. So Catena is where the two fellows from 55 Malbec met and decided to move on and make their own wines.
55 Malbec is the Tejo.
Yes, that's the Tejo.
Yeah. And there was actually another question. I've lost it now. My apologies. But there was a question about the influence of Catena and how influential the winery are. And I suppose an answer would be still very influential. I'm not sure your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would say they are pretty influential. I mean, they are also known as perhaps being a bit imposing. It was Nicolas Catena in 2019. He became the first person from South America to receive the prestigious Decanter Man of the Year award, and it is now his daughter Laura that is doing a lot of the running. So they are influential. I think similarly, Susanna Balbo is very influential in the region, not just for her wines, but for her attitude to the region and to kind of conservation and just winemaking as a whole. I mean, as a woman winemaker, she's done a hell of a lot in terms of sort of breaking down the barriers there. So yeah, both of them very, very influential in the region.
Also, and I said that we'd come back to food at some point. In when you covered food a few moments ago, you spoke specifically about the Cahors and about those two sort of wines, 4 and 5 principally, but 3, 4, and 5, those 3 Argentinian Malbecs with food. Would you have any matches or any suggestions for the first one, that Mendel from Loire, and indeed the Roc de Cahors?
Yes, so the first one, I would say something not too strong on structure as a food, so not as rich a flavour, because it doesn't have those sort of secondary and tertiary qualities. It's not had any of the oak, it's not had any of the extra complexity that the other wines have. It's very fruity, very intense and concentrated fruit. But as I said at the beginning, that's one that I would maybe even chill a little bit. So I would say that's a really good barbecue wine. You know, for your burgers and sausages, that's a really nice one to turn to. Or for something that you would perhaps normally have a fruity accompaniment to. So if you were saying having some duck, and you would normally have that with a bit of a plum sauce or plum compote, that would be a really nice wine to have with it, because you've got that fruity element that you would normally get from the accompaniment to your food. So yeah, something like that. Or lamb, where you would have maybe some red currant jelly. That's what I think.
I can see a few members are mentioning their favourite wines in the chat, and there has been a question. There has been a question as well from James, specifically about us as the tastings team and where we tend to go for Malbecs, whether it be France or Argentina. But perhaps we should ask the members first before we say what we like.
Yeah, so we've just popped up a poll, so do let us know. I'm going to answer it as well. I mean, I think I gave away which my favourite one was earlier on, but yeah, I mean, for myself, the Society's Argentine Malbec is probably the one I drink the most, because it's one that my dad often always has in. So whenever I go around to visit, it's sort of like a house red. So that's the one that I drink the most. And I would say Argentina is probably where I turn to. It sounds mean, but I don't often think about France when I think of a Malbec. But I mean, as we've seen, you know, the perception now is that Argentina is the place for Malbec. I'm very excited to hopefully try the South African Malbec that I mentioned at the beginning, if we get that back in another vintage. I know Anna on our team managed to get a bottle before it was swept up by everyone that loved it, and she said it was really great. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. But what about you, Gil?
Well, I think actually quite similar to you. So I think generally I'd lean towards Argentinian Malbec, largely because it's sort of what's more readily available I suppose, as well. And historically, just what it sort of introduced me to Malbec before I knew the roots of Malbec and Cahors and some of those other regions. But having tasted the 6 wines here, I absolutely loved the first wine, the Touraine Malbec was delicious. Completely different to the other wines and completely different to other Malbecs that I've had before, but certainly a wine I'll be having again, just for that explosive, fruit nature that it has. It's just immediate enjoyment in the glass.
Absolutely. And that's what I think, hopefully members that have had all 6 wines, that's what's been really illustrative this evening, is how different they can all be side by side. It's one of those things that you don't often get to do, obviously, with the tastings. That we do it more than most, but to be able to try a wine of the same variety against each other is really enlightening, really helpful in terms of knowing why you like something, and whether it's the variety or whether it's the winemaking practice, or if it's had some oak, if it's from a higher elevation, a cooler climate, a warmer climate. I hope that's what you've been able to take away from that this evening.
And just because you mentioned it again there, sorry, we've just had a request. Could you mention the name of the South African Malbec again, just for?
Yes, so that is it's from Withington Wines, and they are based in Darling, in South Africa, which is very nice to say, isn't it?
And we have the results from the poll. I don't know if you want to. Do you want to read those out, or shall I read them for it? Or I don't know if you can see them there.
I do have those here. So here we go. So the winning wine this evening looks to be, oh yeah, my favourite, wine number 4. So that's the Cahors, the Cahors Vineyard. That's just a truly delightful wine. I think then coming in second was the Mendel Unas Mendoza. And then the third favourite was wine number 3, which was the Susanna Balbo. So that's all the Argentinians. They've pipped the French there.
And the wine that I mentioned as being very impressed with got 0% 0 votes. Oh well.
Lovely.
I liked it. That's 1 vote. I forgot to vote.
Not at all. So were there any other questions at all that we can?
I think that might be it. Unless anyone has any more questions, do quick fire them into the Q&A. We have a few more minutes, absolutely.
One from Robin about whether the society will also start to buy Cabernet Franc from Argentina.
Oh yes.
That's a very interesting question. I thought we had some Argentinian Cabernet Francs recently. I may be wrong. Let me just have a look. Oh, Tim is saying that we do. I think definitely it's one that we're going to see a bit more. I think Cabernet Franc as a variety is so used to being in blends. We're so used to seeing it in blends that that now that we are seeing it and it's being manipulated well to be a single varietal or a predominant varietal. And I've just had a quick look, and we do actually have 4 that are predominantly Cabernet Franc from Argentina. Actually, the Zaha Toco, which is also from 55 Malbec, that is predominantly Cabernet Franc, I think there, or it has a high proportion, as well as the Susanna Balbo Brioso. So we definitely do have a few on there. I can pop those in the email for everyone tomorrow if you'd like to check those ones out. Oh, and I've just seen an excellent question from Emma about climate change.
There are a few that are coming in there. Do you want to take that one now?
Yeah, so obviously climate change is something that's affecting every wine producing region in the world and everyone in the world, whether they produce wine or not. Obviously, historically, when we thought of climate change, we'd perhaps think global warming. That's not the only thing that can happen. But in Argentina, that is where it's a bit warmer anyway, and you've got higher alcohol. That is one element that can be of cause for concern, and something that winemakers and producers are having to take into account in terms of perhaps picking earlier so that they can keep the alcohol that little bit lower, because as a market, consumers don't want really, really high alcohol wines. And then being a early budding variety, spring frosts again, which is something that will happen in France, as we've seen, as we've seen earlier in this year, the spring frosts really were detrimental, and hail and frosts can also affect areas in Argentina. It's not solely a French or sort of European issue. So that is something that is going to just be on the up. That producers are going to have to probably perhaps invest more into management techniques, things to counteract that. But it's really a tricky one, because it sounds often quite glamorous when you're talking about wine production and wine growers, but it's so agricultural, and it's a livelihood that really it takes a lot of and there's not a huge amount of money in producing wine, so it's a real investment. And I do think it's something that's going to just be considered more, and it's hopefully it's something that people will be able to share their knowledge and share resources for. And but growing vines on those higher elevations at the higher altitude, that's only going to be of benefit. And it may be that we will just see vineyards getting higher and higher up the Andes as much as they can, and to try and get away from those areas where they're very limited in what they can do to counteract climate change.
I think I remember reading some of that snow melt, which is a sort of large, I think less of an issue climate change wise, the reduction of snow melt and therefore water from irrigation point than Chile is facing. But Argentina, I would imagine, still has that as a worry and a concern.
Yeah, as well. So that it's that's one of the other elements that we're thinking of. There's so many facets to what climate change is, and it's just the general the general changing in the climate. It will alter how people farm agriculture. It will alter so many things that perhaps at the moment we just don't fully know the outcome of. But yeah, definitely a worry, but hopefully not in the too near future.
And I've got two more questions that I can see here in the chat. So James has asked, and we actually mentioned one of these wines a few moments ago, but do we have any 100% Malbecs?
That's an excellent question. That might be one that I will have to get back to you on the email tomorrow. Unfortunately, I'm not on the system to be able to check exactly on our.
I'm pretty sure that our exhibition Malbec that we just mentioned about Catena is 100% Malbec.
Yes, it is. That's
I'm not sure about others.
That one is 100% Malbec. It's actually it is 100%, but it is a blend from 3 different sort of regions. So in Argentina, so it's 100% Malbec, but they're from different areas. So it does add that nice dimension and extra quality to it.
And then one more, and I don't know if you've tasted this or if you've tasted other wines like it, but we have a question here from Lorna McKenzie about your views on sweet Malbec. For example, the Susana Balbo's Late Harvest. Do you have a view on sweet Malbec?
I would be very interested to try it. I haven't tried that. If anyone has tried it, let me know. Lorna, if you've tried it, pop in the chat what you thought. That sounds very interesting. I
threw you under the bus a little bit there. I apologize.
You can have very tannic sweet red wines, perhaps something like Mady. That's quite tannic, but I'd be really interested. Oh, Lorna said it's fantastic. In that case, Lorna, I will find it and I will try it. Yeah, so Robin's saying there's some lovely port-like wines. I imagine they would be. That sounds delicious. That's going to be my aim now, to find a lovely late harvest sweet Malbec.
A goal for the weekend.
Absolutely.
I think that's all the questions there, I think, Catherine.
It is indeed. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And I hope you've enjoyed the wines. If you've had all 6 and you had the sample pack, I hope you enjoyed having the sample pack. We are looking at doing more events with the packs. Personally, I find them very useful for someone sort of solo trying wines. It's really nice to be able to have that comparison. So hopefully, if you haven't had the pack for this one, it will pique your interest in getting one for one of our future events. But thank you very much for joining me. Thank you, Tim and Gil, as well. And I hope you all have a lovely evening. Cheers.